All right, now we're going to cover the division, the diencephalon. The diencephalon is going to have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the infundibulum, the pituitary gland, and the pineal gland. All right, when we look at the diencephalon, all right, our four divisions, we have the cerebrum, that's the largest part, the cerebellum, and now we have the diencephalon. Now, the brain stem is going to be from here to here. The diencephalon includes everything between. So all the way to here. So it's underneath the corpus callosum. These are all regions of the diencephalon. Now I should take an outline and outline the pituitary gland just a little bit better. All right, that's your diencephalon. Your diencephalon is in both cerebral hemispheres. It is a division. It is below the corpus callosum. But above the brainstem. Now, there's a lot of structures to cover in the diencephalon. All of that is the diencephalon. Now, I do want to show you on the brain model. If I took a left cerebral hemisphere, this would look like the picture. So your diencephalon is under the corpus callosum. It is going to have the pituitary gland and the pineal gland, which are pink. It's going to have this right here, which is the thalamus, and then your hypothalamus. So all of these are part of the diencephalon. If I took a right brain model, you would also see the same exact things. The cerebellum is always to the back, so all of this is the diencephalon. Anything below the corpus callosum, but above the brainstem, this is the diencephalon. Typically, you would say thalamus is in the center, hypothalamus, hypo means below, and then epithalamus means above. So technically it's thalamus, hypothalamus, and epi means upon, but we're not really talking about the epithalamus. We're just going to talk about the pituitary gland, which is pink, and so pineal gland, sorry. Thalamus is the little dot, and then hypothalamus is going to have the pituitary gland. So I'm using a left cerebral hemisphere so that you can actually see the pituitary gland. So the diencephalon includes the thalamus, which is in the center. When you drop anterior and below, that's the hypothalamus. Now the infundibulum is the stalk that connects to the pituitary gland. It's just this little stalk, that white thing right there. And then you have your pituitary gland. I say it, students told me in the past, they said it looks like a little cherry, so pituitary, but it's really pituitary gland, and then the pineal gland. So we're gonna go over these with the picture and write out their functions. So I have a picture for the diencephalon to help you better understand the diencephalon. So this would technically be a right cerebral hemisphere. So you can see some of the same things. The only thing is the pituitary gland is not here, but it's connected to the hypothalamus. So we will draw that, and then you see this little dot, that's the thalamus. And then the pineal gland is in the back, which is pink. So this is basically a picture of the diencephalon. Now, I'm going to color code this. This central piece I'm drawing or coloring it as blue. That's the thalamus. The thalamus is actually pretty large. The thalamus is the major structure in the diencephalon, and there's a reason why it's blue. Blue is always for sensory. When we talk about the thalamus is part of the diencephalon. This would be the thalamus. And then in the basal nuclei, the thalamus. It's the central region of the diencephalon. So I didn't color those because those weren't the thalamus. So here's your thalamus. Now your glands are always going to be pink. The little cone-shaped gland in the back is your pineal gland. And the gland that looks like a cherry is your pituitary gland. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the thalamus. The thalamus is always going to be referred to as our sensory gateway. So, sensory neurons have to travel up the brainstem, and they're going to travel to the thalamus. That whole middle section is your thalamus. If we were looking at the picture that we just did, this is a left cerebral hemisphere. This circle represents your thalamus. So your diencephalon, the very center of it, is your thalamus. Most important structure, thalamus. Now, if you drop below the thalamus anteriorly, again it's below, not above, but below, this is known as your hypothalamus. Hypo means below. That's right there. Now, the stalk that connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus is known as the infundibulum. Infundibulum. You find a black marker that's working, that's thin. Some of my markers are going bad. The stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary is called the infundibulum. The gland connected to the hypothalamus is called the pituitary gland. Again, the pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus through a stalk called the infundibulum. And in the back, this pink structure is the pineal gland. All right. Now, technically above the thalamus would be the epithalamus. So when we talk about the thalamus, it's easiest to look at the thalamus here. When we talk about the thalamus is a sensory gateway. So the brainstem is going to allow for sensory neurons to travel up to the thalamus. Now, all senses have to be processed. So your thalamus is literally going to be your sensory gateway. All sensory neurons, I'm going to use a blue, all sensory neurons travel up to the thalamus where they are processed. So sensory neurons travel up, they're called ascending, the brainstem, and they're going to stop at the thalamus, which is the largest thing, which has to basically integrate and interpret what sensation is coming. Now, since all of our cerebral cortex areas have different sensations, if the sensation is vision, the thalamus is going to send it to the occipital lobe. If you're touching something hot, it'll send it to the parietal lobe because that is general senses. If it's involved with hearing, it's going to send it to the temporal lobe. So I always call the thalamus like my sensory bus stop. Literally, all sensory neurons are going to travel up the brainstem and they're going to stop right here. So sensory neurons travel up the brainstem and they're going to go to the thalamus. So when you talk about the thalamus, we call this the sensory gateway. What we mean by that is all sensory neurons travel to the thalamus and are interpreted. So if it's something to do with vision, then we're going to send it to the vision lobe. So we process it, interpret or process it, and it sends the information to the appropriate cerebral cortex area. The thalamus is probably one of the most important areas. It's the largest anyway. Now, the hypothalamus is very important as well, but in a different way. So, for hypothalamus, remember homeostasis. The hypothalamus is going to be involved with homeostasis. Hypo means below. Its job is homeostasis. Now, a lot of different homeostasis functions are here. When we say homeostasis, that's equilibrium in the body. So, the homeostasis it's going to control is your body temperature. It's going to make sure that you maintain a 98.6. It's going to control your water levels. And your electrolytes. It's going to control your blood oxygen and CO2 levels. It's going to control your blood hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions, which is going to be important for AMP2. It's going to control hunger and your body weight. We actually, in our brain, have a certain body weight that our brain thinks is the perfect weight for us. But there's so many to name. So, etc., etc., etc. Homeostasis. When we say homeostasis, this is going to control so many different things. Lots of homeostasis things. Now, your pineal gland and your pituitary gland. And your infundibulum. The infundibulum is the stalk that connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. That's all this is. It's a stalk. Stalk was like a beanstalk. So this is going to connect the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. Now, we've learned a little bit about glands on the safety pin cycle. Glands are part of your endocrine system. So your pituitary gland is going to be an endocrine gland. It is going to store and produce hormones. Now, when we get to AMP2, we'll learn a lot about the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Right now, we're just learning the structures. But the pineal gland also produces hormones. So, when we talk about our pineal gland, on the other hand, your pineal gland is cone-shaped. That's where it gets the word pine. Pineal is like a pine cone. It is cone-shaped. But its job is to produce the hormone melatonin. So I'm running out of room. Let's see if I have anything on the back of this. I do. Produces hormone melatonin. Melatonin is going to deal with the sleep-wake cycle. Which we're going to talk about. When you say sleep-wake cycle, that is going to be circadian rhythms. So we're going to talk a little bit about the sleep-wake cycle, but these are all the structures of the diencephalon. The thalamus is the sensory gateway. Then you have your hypothalamus, hypo for homeostasis. The infundibulum is the stalk. Pituitary gland is an endocrine gland that stores and produces hormones. But the pineal gland produces a specific hormone, melatonin, used with our sleep-wake cycle. So when we talk about the sleep-wake cycle, it's also called our circadian rhythm. Our circadian rhythm is the 24-hour cycle of the day. It includes being awake, and it includes your sleep cycles. So I'm going to talk about our sleep cycles because it's part of the pineal gland. I just ran out of room, so I just added it on the next page. So I'm going to turn my page this way, and I'm going to label my sleep-wake cycle. It is going to be controlled by melatonin. So the pineal gland is going to produce melatonin. You only produce melatonin when it's dark, which is going to control the sleep-wake cycle. All right, so we can actually look at your sleep-wake cycle. All right, your sleep-wake cycle. You have light sleep and you have deep sleep. So if it goes further down, it's deep sleep, and if it goes further up, it's light sleep. So obviously, when you're awake, you're not really producing melatonin. So we can measure your brain waves. So we're gonna just do this as green. This is your awake. If you're awake, you have no melatonin. Melatonin helps you sleep. So when you're awake, your brain produces waves called beta waves. That's how when we know you're awake. Now, as the sun sets and it starts getting dark outside, when it starts to get dark, you increase your melatonin production and you start to feel sleepy. So the first 3 phases are called sleep stage 1 or sleep cycle 1, sleep cycle 2, and sleep cycle 3. So you get drowsy because you start producing melatonin. So this is going to be sleep cycle 1. You start to produce more melatonin. Second stage, more melatonin, sleep cycle 2. And then you have sleep cycle 3. Now, either one of these is super deep sleep. Now, the waves that you produce during sleep stages 1 through 3, or cycles, is called theta waves. It's just a wave in your brain that we can measure. Now, this is over time, so over minutes. So, you're awake, the sun goes down, you start to notice the sun goes down, you start to produce melatonin. So it's going to progressively get darker as the sun goes down. So when it gets really dark, 20 minutes, you can go to sleep. It's getting even darker, 30 minutes. You get into stage 3, about 40 minutes. And then you continue to stage 4 and 5. But when we talk about sleep cycle stage 1 through 3, basically, this is going to be drowsiness, followed by decreased light in the day, and it's basically going to take you to deep sleep, moderate deep sleep, because deep sleep is on the lower end. So you're not in very deep. 40 minutes in, you're not in very deep. So when you get to stage 4, you produce delta waves. And in stage 4, man, you go into deep sleep. Let me go a little lower. This is your stage 4. You're in sleep. You're in stage 4, but you're producing a different kind of wave. Think delta for deep. Delta waves. When you're producing delta waves, you're in deep sleep. Deep. Deep sleep. Now this occurs roughly about, 60 minutes, an hour after you've been asleep. Now, after you've been asleep for a while, you go into a different phase. You actually kind of move up back into the beta waves. They're not beta waves, but they really resemble beta waves. So, all of a sudden, you kind of seem like you're awake. This is called REM sleep cycle. This is where it's like 70 to 75 minutes. Now, when you're in REM sleep, REM stands for rapid eye movement. So this is when your eyes start to kind of like move around. That's where they get rapid eye movement. This is when you start dreaming. You can always see when a dog is basically in rapid eye movement. So REM, R-E-M, stands for rapid eye movement. This is going to be your dream sleep. Now, your dream sleep is going to be 10 to 15 minutes. Now, the waves that you see, they're not beta waves, but they resemble them. So it's almost like you're awake because you're dreaming. Now, a couple other things are going on in here. Your heart rate is irregular. Usually, when I think of REM sleep, my dog is always running from something. She gets really upset when she's in her dream sleep. So your heart rate is irregular and your breathing rate. I don't know if she's running from something or if she's chasing something. So usually a dog will start to cry and she'll start to move her like feet. She dreams quite a bit. So your heart rate and your respiratory rate are irregular. I guess because it can be stressful in your dreams. I'm not really sure. Now, you have to have REM sleep. You have to make up for REM sleep. This is very important. If you don't, you can actually well, I don't really know exactly what happens, but you have to make it up. I do know that alcohol and marijuana are going to interfere with your REM sleep. So if you participate in any of these things, you actually will go, or you'll say you don't have dreams. That's a common thing that people say. I do know that during sleep you produce growth hormone. That's when you heal your body. There's a lot of things that they say with sleep is like to stay skinny, you actually have to have enough sleep. To not be depressed, you have to have enough sleep. So I'm guessing that's where the REM sleep is if you don't get into REM sleep, you can have other health issues. And I'm not going to go into anything deep on that, but your circadian rhythm is basically what is going to control your sleep-wake cycles because of melatonin. Now, when it starts getting light in the morning, you decrease melatonin and you wake up. So when we talk about REM versus non-REM, REM sleep is only this in orange. So technically stages 1 through 4, are non-REM. Non-REM sleep, stages 1 through 4. So when we talk about the diencephalon is going to include the thalamus, which is your sensory gateway, your hypothalamus for homeostasis, the infundibulum, the stalk that holds the pituitary gland. But both of your glands produce hormones. The pituitary gland has so many hormones that we're going to cover this in A&P2. The pineal gland, on the other hand, produces melatonin, and it's used with the sleep-wake cycle, which we do call the circadian rhythm, from being awake through the stages of sleep of REM. So that is the diencephalon. When looking at this guy, you can see everything. The thalamus is the sensory gateway, so sensory neurons travel up. This is going to interpret it and send it to the appropriate cortex. So if a sensory neuron comes up for vision, it'll say, oh, that's for vision, send it to the occipital lobe. The pineal gland is here. It's going to be responsible for producing melatonin for the sleep-wake cycle. The pituitary gland is going to be producing hormones and storing hormones. The infundibulum is the stalk that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. And this right here is the hypothalamus, which is responsible for homeostasis. So we're going to cover the brainstem next.